adventure in brain injury on the podcast, Adventures in Brain Injury. This episode is brought to you by Revive Treatment Centers in Denver, Colorado. Dr. Josh Flowers, Dr. Manuel Nunez, Dr. Charlene Godet, very amazing team of functional neurologists, and I'm a big fan of them.
They're an integrative team, just like the brain is integrative with all the other body systems.
It's all connected, Michelle.
It's all connected, says the 8-year-old.
There you go.
It's terrific to be able to connect our listeners with the emerging and growing functional neurology field. I'm excited. And I'm excited about our guest upcoming too, but we'll get to that in a moment.
We'll get to that. If you would like to be a part of this show, we are looking for sponsors right now.
Reach out and touch us. feedupbrain.com/sponsors.
Yes. To be approved, go to feedupbrain.com/sponsor and write us a little something of why you should be approved, or just schedule a conversation with me and we'll talk about it.
Sounds great. And we'll get the word out. And we should also note that there is pre-roll space available right here, right now, or post-roll, so at the conclusion of our episodes.
Thank you, Michelle.
You're welcome, Kevin.
Next up on the agenda is Patreon.
Yes.
If you're enjoying this show and you're getting some value out of this, head over to patreon.com/AIBI for Adventures in Brain Injury, and throw us a buck or two for each episode. It really helps us get the word out and helps us reach more people.
Thank you in advance. And Kevin, how about that Feed a Brain book you've been working on?
Yeah, well, it's written. We're just jumping through all of the many hoops.
That's good for your brain. That's good neuro exercise.
It really is, man. This is really, really some organizational challenge right here. But we're making things happen, and it's really great to know the lives we're capable of touching with this book.
You have this integrative team behind the scenes, and I'm on the Feed a Brain website, and I see the team that you have who's been reading your electronic copy. Of course, the secret link to the electronic copy, because it's not released yet. And one of our favorite clinical nutritionists wrote a beautiful quote, and I'd like to speak to that right now.
Please do.
So Jessica Flanagan, out of the San Francisco area, wrote as her comment, "How to Feed a Brain is a brain nutrition game changer. A must for those needing nutritional support to heal the brain in a straightforward and cutting-edge style. As the field of brain nutrition grows, this book will be a treasured resource for many. For practitioners like me, this book provides a crystal clear nutrition roadmap for my clients. Kevin is truly an inspiration. He has taken his own stumbling block and turned it into a stepping stone to share with the world. Kevin shows us how the human spirit can grow and even flourish under the hardest of circumstances." Well done, my friend.
Thank you. And thank you, Jessica. Jessica's work with the loving diet and going beyond food into, what is it called? Going beyond paleo into the heart of what ails you.
Yeah, that's a beautiful book. I got that book as soon as it was released. I ordered it. It's terrific.
You're the one who introduced me to her work, and absolutely, it's phenomenal. Thank you so much, Jessica.
Yes, thank you. And we've got to get that woman on this podcast.
Oh, we will. I think she's scheduled. I think we have her scheduled.
I was just doing a little foreshadowing.
And you're just playing around a little bit. I got you.
Yes, we had to have her on. Yes, I'm looking forward to that. I just get the sense from following her work for the last year and a half, almost 2 years really. Yes, 2 years. She's just a lovely soul and really dedicated. excuse me, to helping individuals heal. And of course, that goes beyond individuals. We get into families and communities. But we'll leave that for another conversation. Okay. So our guest today is out taking a walk in the beautiful Michigan sunshine. So
yeah. So
clearly,
tell us about Dr. Nate Keiser.
Yes, we're so thrilled to have Dr. Nate Keiser. He is a Michigan man, born and raised and educated, earning his BSc in Kinesiology from Michigan State University. His Doctorate of Chiropractic studies took him to Life University in Marietta, Georgia, and concurrently began to pursue functional neurology, earning special recognition in vestibular rehab, childhood developmental disorders, neurochemistry, movement disorders, and traumatic brain injury. In 2010, he was board certified as a diplomate in chiropractic neurology through the American Board of Chiropractic Neurology, and he served patients from the U.S. and around the globe through his private practice. Dr. Keiser is also an assistant professor of clinical neurology for the Carrick Institute, which provides postgraduate instruction for doctors of all disciplines in the field of clinical and functional neurology. He is an international lecturer and regularly presents across the U.S., Canada, and Europe. So we're looking forward to seeing you in Calgary, Canada, Dr. Keiser. And his clinical interests and research foci are in the field of non-surgical, non-pharmaceutical management of concussion, dysautonomia, traumatic brain injury, and movement disorders. And we love to emphasize the non-surgical, non-pharmaceutical management. In 2015, he earned a fellowship to the American Board of Brain Injury Rehabilitation and currently serves as a member of that board. He is a co-investigator in several studies within the research network, and his research interests are in translational applications in diagnosis and treatment, which may have merit in future brain rehabilitation applications. That's of interest to us. So welcome to the podcast, Dr. Keiser.
Wow, thank you. It sounds like a mouthful when you say it, but thank you so much. I sound very accomplished.
And as we were saying, we've got lots of spaghetti there. We've got to highlight things.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, we don't mess around. We're gonna say it like it is. We're gonna talk about what you've done because it's all very impressive.
Yeah, and we thank you for what you've done.
Well, thank you very much. It's just funny how those things just kind of happen over time. You got your head down, and then kind of look up and see what's happened in that period. So it's kind of funny.
Yes, I'm sure.
That's great.
Well, before we, Kevin, I'm going to jump in. Well, I'm curious, before we get into our deep conversations, I have to ask what your definition of translational applications are, because it sounds fascinating and has the future in it. And I want to know what you mean by translational applications.
Awesome. Yeah, I don't get that question a lot, so that's perfect. So when we talk about translational activities, particularly in research fields, it's kind of from the perspective of how do we take things that we're doing and learning in a clinical setting and apply them or start to tease them apart into things that we can publish on, that we can share with other people, so that we can move forward at a faster rate. Sometimes when you start outside of the clinical world, you start in a lab, the questions aren't quite the same, and the applications aren't quite the same with how they translate into a clinical setting. So sometimes working the other way around allows us to get questions answered that are more pertinent to the people in front of us a little bit faster, and it helps guide the laboratory research into something that physicians can use, patients can benefit from. So it's just a kind of little different way to look at the timeline.
I absolutely love that spin, because some people are like, oh, it's anecdotal. It's like anecdotal actually has a lot of important credit. My word muscles aren't working so well, but it certainly has amazing application to it, and I'm a huge fan of the way you put that with translational research.
I get the same questioning up here in Canada. It's absolutely no different. Well, it's anecdotal. What more do you have to go on? Forward me some research. So it is critical that you take what you see and what is working and publish it. It just needs to be documented, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, everybody that practices and everybody that you guys talk to, you guys get to talk to some really great people.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody's got tons and tons of stories of people that have done well. We've also got stories of people that haven't, but both of those things are important to talk about because they help you to be able to refine what you're doing so that we can all move together faster. Because that's the goal, is to just have everyone be able to provide service for people that need it and do it in a way that is better. And as time goes on, we always get better. If we look at the way things were done 100 years ago, of course we're better now. But if we can fast forward some of those time frames and help the people that live within them, then that's a pretty special thing, because they can't wait till the next generation, and they can't wait until everything catches up.
Amen to that.
Yes,
accelerate the evolution of medicine, how we practice neurorehabilitation and brain optimization. So thank you for what you're doing. I wanted to ask you about a patient-centered approach and how that's different from the disease-centered approach that we usually see. Sure.
So, obviously there's certain cliches that are kind of thrown around on a lot of web pages around the world, and that tends to be one of them, that patient-centered. But that's kind of the paradigm that we have to look at patients through, because if you try to fit everybody into a system, there's going to be, depending on how involved your system is, there are going to be people that just are outliers to that, or even people that fit within it but don't fit within, what you have isn't the thing for them. But if you turn around and ask the question a little differently, rather than, how does that person fit in with what I'm doing, can you say, what does this person need and how can I figure out how to get it to them? Then that really changes the relationship, and it allows you to be able to be a little bit more creative in how you answer that question. And if you do that for enough people, your ideas and concepts get a little bit bigger and bigger and bigger, and it allows you to just help the person that's in front of you, rather than trying to, apply your widget to someone and hope that it works.
I love how you use the word paradigm. I actually wrote an article called "The Proof is in the Pudding and the Problem is in the Paradigm."
I love that.
Has a lot to do with...
Your word muscles were on that day.
They were working. They were firing. So the idea is what we were talking about earlier. The proof is in the pudding is what we see when we see anecdotal evidence of something. Proof is in the pudding, we often say. The paradigm of only taking, empirical data that's repeatable, double-blind, placebo-controlled, all that, and discounting the other data is a problem in the paradigm, and it kind of holds up the evolution of medicine and how we treat the brain.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, to think that we could do a double-blind study and that we could do, complete double-blind RCTs has a bad initial assumption. We talk about assumptions in logic, and the assumption is that we know enough to blind for all the variables, considering that we don't really know everything. So we're making the assumption that we know all the variables, and I think that we do better all the time, but I don't think that's true. So we can never really hit that standard. So we have to do something that's more practical, understanding that we don't know the variables, but if we can look at clinical outcomes and get consistent clinical outcomes, then we can start to say, okay, we know that when we do this happens. And if when we do this, that happens, then we can start to design questions around, well, why does that happen? And rather than saying, why does it happen first before we ever do compare it to the clinical outcome. So I think, what you said, Kevin, is right on the money with talking about the proof is in the pudding. Yeah, it's there. So why don't we start there and then ask the questions rather than design these big, exuberant studies that maybe don't really answer the questions that are important.
That's
Yes,
beautiful. And I love how you're saying the assumptions. So the first thing we got to know is that every brain is unique, and these differences profoundly affect function. So small differences in the connectome profoundly affect function. Small injuries, etc. So having consistent variables is kind of impossible.
Exactly.
And let's throw in the fact that the female brain is not studied because there are so many variables. So we've got these RCTs, these randomized controlled trials that are only focused on one gender.
Exactly.
And so that the outcomes of those aren't even applicable to the other half of the population.
Yeah, so imagine you have to use all one gender because that's one of the variables you have to control for. But if you're leaving out the other half, does that just make the assumption that we just can't treat those people, right? We don't know what to do. And then you break it down even beyond that into all the different phenotypes and injuries and genotypes, and you never have a shot. So.
Yes. Well, and I appreciate the humility that this new paradigm shows, because we absolutely cannot account for all of the variables. And I think it's rather egoic to think that we can.
Exactly. I like that.
All right, Kevin, we've got a list.
Speaking of variables, when we talk about brain injury, we're usually talking about the way it's usually talked about is impact coup, contra coup, like you hit your head and then your head sloshes back and it hits the other side.
Sloshes?
It sloshes, totally sloshes. It's gelatin. It totally sloshes. So when we talk about that, though, you mentioned the problem with that is it's two-dimensional. So what do you mean by that?
Well, so if you look at, if you pop on Wikipedia right now and you pull up, concussion or acquired TBI, you see this really cool visual rendering of a brain with an arrow and a red spot in the front and then another arrow pointing backwards and there's a red spot in the back. But that's a two-dimensional image. You can see that on your computer screen. But if you've ever thought about moving your head, you know that you're not limited to just what is directly in front of you. There's rotation involved. You can move your head in 360 degrees of movement. It's a really cool thing that we can do. So we know that if you hit your head or you have whiplash in your neck, that your head is going to move not just forward and back, but it's going to rotate. It's going to bend. It's going to have some different tensile forces put into it. And that's going to cause a tension relationship that goes all the way, that translates from the neck where the spinal cord is. The spinal cord is continuous with the brain. So any kind of tension that's put on that cord is going to be transmitted through to the brainstem and ultimately to the brain. And then even on the inside of the skull, that skull is going to be round as well. So if you have movement of the brain within the skull, there's going to be rotation within the skull as well. So if you can imagine, you talked about gelatin, I think that's pretty good. An unfixed brain has that really soft consistency. If you held it in your hands, it would almost just drip through.
Wow.
And so if you think about that, and if you've ever seen a skull, most people have of some kind, they're kind of sharp on the inside. So if you create that rotation, you not only smack the tissue, but you twist the tissues on the inside, kind of like if you were wringing a towel.
Yes.
And you also have some different forces that concur across the bony edges. So it's not as simple as one mechanism. We see that whoever created us gave us like a couple things that might happen at different degrees for different people.
Right. So many variables. Many variables.
So how do these injuries affect body systems? And what would you say are the main systems of the brain?
Okay. So our brain kind of exists, if we kind of give you a backstory a little bit to give it some context.
Sure.
But it exists so that we can interact with the world around us, right? So as a baby, you can interact kind of in certain ways. You figure out what gravity is. You start figuring out where your hands are. Hey, I like food, those kinds of things. But you have some different reference frames for how you orient to that. So one is where your head is in space. You kind of have to know that. So we use our eyes to tell us where the horizon is, and that helps us to figure out where up is in our gravity world.
Okay.
And then we use our visual system. That's one system. We have to use our inner ear to tell us where our head is moving and how much, but also two, if it's moving up or down or what's its relationship to the earth.
Right.
So that's number two, is our inner ear. And then three would be from all of the somatotopic or kinesthetic awareness that we have, where our joints are in space, how contracted our muscles are, how all those things interact. And all that information comes into the brain together, and each one has a different picture of you, right? So you have a picture of you that's generated from your body, and you have a picture of you that's generated from your eyes, and you have a picture of you that comes from your ear, and they all overlap on top of each other in your brain. And your brain's job is to figure out, one, if all these systems work perfectly, all of those pictures should work the same, and you will be a highly efficient human being. Now, if one is maybe not working as well as the others, your brain can compare the three pictures and say, you know what? One of these is not like the other. We're going to go ahead and say these two are probably more correct. So we're gonna decrease the amount of value that we place on that opinion from the third structure.
Interesting.
And then if we have, two that go down, now we have a problem, because we now have to take extra time for your brain to decide, okay, I'm getting these three pictures, they don't really look alike. I'm still operating in this world. I've still got a goal to achieve. I still have to put this foot down without falling. How can I kind of piece this together to make a best estimate of what's going on so that I can achieve the goal I'm trying to do? I can walk, or I can pick up a cup, or I can turn my head without falling.
Right.
So we see any injuries that occur within the systems that deliver that information to the brain can cause a problem, or the areas that process it, that overlay those images. If those have a problem, we see errors. Or if all of that works, but when we go to execute the command to put the foot down, if that system doesn't execute it correctly, then we'll have a problem as well. So it's a kind of a simplistic way to look at it. But if you start there, it gives you an easier reference frame to understand how all these things fit on top of each other. When you start to look at people like Kevin, you understand that people can have an injury where a whole load of things seem to be wrong, and it kind of perplexes people. Like, how can there be something wrong with the way I speak, but then also the way I see? Those things aren't related. One's in the front of the brain and one's in the back. You know what I mean?
If people even know that much.
Sure. So then it allows you to be able to look at these things and say, where do they share common structure? Where do they share common processing? And how do we, if we can look at those things, then how can we understand where the errors are occurring? And if we can we do something about them?
Right. Well, I'm going to back you up a little bit. I know you said that it's simple, but let's break it down a little bit. So, because it's still like, whoa, all right, we have these. Absolutely. So we have our visual picture, we have our vestibular picture, and we have our somatosensory picture, and that would be where our body knows it is, based on the muscles and the perception that goes back to the brain. Then, so if one of those isn't working very well, and it has a different picture of our brain than the other two have, then our brain's very democratic, and it goes, okay, we're going to go with the majority here. And then if we have two of them that aren't working, then it's all screwed up. Then we really are malfunctioning in a bigger way. On top of that, so we have all these systems where the information's coming in, and then also we have how that information is processed in the brain, and we can have things that aren't working very well in that regard as well. So from that, we can see that any change in any system can change every system.
Yeah.
Nail on the head. That's beautiful, Kevin.
So incredibly delicate, these systems, and they're well, delicate, but I mean, Dr. Keiser, you were talking about how well these symptoms can compensate for one another. And I think so many people, they don't recognize that there's an injury, or their attending physician doesn't recognize how serious an injury might be, because the brain is so competent at compensating.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's part of the beauty of what we can do is we can have things go massively wrong and still achieve significant goals.
I got my hand up over here. I'm like, yeah. I just got back from Barton Springs this morning, and I was throwing some front flips and back flips for vestibular rehab, right? Now I definitely I have ataxia on the left side of my body, or I was corrected, it's dystaxia, because it's not there. It's just kind of screwed up. So A would mean it doesn't work, and dys means it works, just not very well. But I'm compensating, and I'm able to throw flips, So that's the compensation that we're talking about. And that's what brain injury survivors, and really most people with any injury or anything, anytime in their life, most human beings end up compensating in one way or another for deficits in their brain function or body function.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. I mean, that's the trick, and that's understanding. That's where we take that clinical part we talked about, the things that we see in life, and that's how we translate them into the question becomes, how can we take somebody like Kevin who's able to do these things, and how can we translate that to other people or within other systems, or, you know what I mean? So I think it's beautiful, and it's amazing to see what the brain can do on its own. And even if you can just give it a little push, the things that it'll do without, us really understanding it all the way. Although we understand some really good things, I still hold that true, that we kind of don't understand all the mechanisms just yet.
Yeah, and that's actually something I hear a lot, is like, well, the brain's just so complex. Well, we won't understand it. It's like, yeah, but we know so much.
Yeah, we know enough to work with.
Exactly.
Exactly, and that's what I absolutely love about functional neurology and the work of Dr. Carrick and others, as far as like taking what we know about the brain and then following the pathways of things and trying clinical, or applying them clinically, trying them on patients, seeing what happens, recording those results, and coming up with a system based on anecdotal data like we talked about.
Yeah.
So,
it's a fun time to be part of that, and we're lucky to be on this side of it. So, and Dr. Carrick's done some, just amazing work, the things he's been able to observe and put together and postulate and then give to other people. Just amazing guy, amazing work. I can't ever say enough about him and the chance I got to work with him. So he's just amazing.
Isn't it amazing what comes out of Canada?
Don't you know?
I think something about that air, Winnipegger up there.
And that pasta.
Yeah, right. Hey, we say pasta. Yeah, we say pasta. I'm always looking for opportunities, like Dr. Keiser. I'm always looking for opportunities to hail the Canadians, many of whom head down south. But we don't begrudge him having turned in his snow shovel for a golf club. There's no problem there.
Hey,
exactly.
Well, he gave
and
up
if there was ever
for hurricanes.
Exactly. If there was ever a global citizen, then he would be the guy. Because every time you talk to him, he's in a different part of the globe, just helping people and doing research, and just a phenomenal character. He's just a great guy.
Getting the word out. Yes, I do. And you're right. It's such an exciting time to be a part of this. And we've mentioned it before, but so many of us aren't fitting into that mold, into that paradigm of allopathic medicine or conventional neurology. And we end up searching for answers because we know there's more possibility. And then voila, functional neurology. And now I'm so pleased to be able, well, especially with the internet, I get to pass along information quickly, efficiently to other families who are suffering with brain injuries, whether it's, a mom who slipped ice skating or a kid who's taken a real hard hit in hockey. Sidney Crosby really opened up the functional neurology realm to us in Canada, because of course he's one of ours, and we follow our folk.
Sidney Crosby was playing for Pittsburgh Penguins
when he took a hit. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
yes.
I want to talk about how you're focused on non-surgical and non-pharmaceutical treatment, which of course we're big fans of. With surgery, you can't undo a surgery, right? Mm-hmm. So you specialize in the management of concussions, traumatic brain injury, and dysautonomia. So I wanted to talk a little bit about dysautonomia. What is that?
Well, it's common with all kinds of brain injuries. So if you think about it just on its simplest terms, like you said, dystaxia, right? Your movement just doesn't quite work right. It's not gone, it just doesn't work right. So dysautonomia, your autonomic system is all the stuff you don't think about. Breathing, you don't have to think about your heartbeat. You don't have to think about your postural system in a lot of ways. You don't have to think about how your body sends blood to all these different parts. And most of us don't even realize that we don't have enough blood volume to go into all of our blood vessels at one time. Your brain has to actually kind of open and shut some doors and move some pipes around to be able to send it. It's got to squeeze the pipes down to create more pressure, and it's got to be able to open some up to take some pressure away. Right. So it's constantly doing that without us thinking about it. So when we have brain injuries, a huge output from our brain goes with. So as I make my movement to try to replicate Kevin's backflip, which I'll never be able to do, but if I were to try, as I do that and I go, all right, brain, backflip time, brain's going, first thing it's saying is, well, you can't do that. But the second thing it's doing is going to say, well, if you're going to try, we need to at least send some blood to your legs to be able to drive off your legs and to be able to extend your back and to be able to spot your landing. So your brain is constantly sending blood, changing that tissue perfusion to be able to do that. And when we injure our brain and we see that map gets a little off, or those pictures that we talked about, we may not send the right amount of blood to the right spot, or you may not irrigate the right part of your brain to be able to do it. So these people have different types of consequences that are related. Just on a side note, when I got the opportunity to go down and work with Dr. Carrick in Atlanta, we always talked about the autonomic system, but it really kind of shone a big spotlight on it when we started seeing people that had these severe concussions and severe brain injuries, because we started to see just how compromised that would make the autonomic system. So that forced me to really look a lot stronger at it, because it drastically impacted our treatment. If you could figure out the area that wasn't working, like we talked about earlier, you still had this big question of how do you exercise that area if it can't get its own blood supply squared away? So we had to start looking and saying, how do we augment this blood supply? How do we make sure that everything can get appropriate fuel so that when we stimulate it, it's actually exercise and it's not tearing the tissue down?
Right.
So that's a huge component of it. And so a lot of people that have brain injuries also have dysautonomias. But now we're starting to see people where they're, well, not now, but to a greater degree, people find us that have dysautonomic symptoms, where they're actually feeling like when they stand up, they don't get any blood flow to their head, or when they exercise, the whole system goes haywire and they feel terrible and they can't move and they can't think and they get brain fog and all the stuff that goes with that. So
I'm so glad you said that, because a lot of people are not diagnosed with dysautonomia, but they experience these symptoms. So what are some other symptoms that you stand up, you lose, you feel a little dizzy? What else?
So the things that I like to point to are most adults have at some point in their life maybe overindulged a little bit on some Canada's finest booze or something like that. Something like that. And most people at least have one reference point where they can think of the time where they had the worst hangover of their life. So all of those symptoms are kind of the symptoms of dysautonomia. So you think about, you wake up, you got that, you first open your eyes, you got that headache, it can be pulsing, or you may notice that if you are brave enough to actually open your eyes, it may be blurry or even a little double.
Sure.
You can have, maybe you decide it's worth trying to sit up and you realize you've got that nauseous feeling in your gut and you start sweating and you feel lightheaded and that whole thing. And then maybe you're just a veteran at it and you're brave and you get up and decide, to trudge on with your day. So everything feels kind of slow and a little bit off, and you're not so hungry because you can't really eat and you can't really digest food. You've got that kind of sensitive stomach, and then you go to work and your energy's really low. Your mood's not very great. Can't really think as well as you normally do. There might be that fog you've got to sift through to get there. And then, you lay down, you don't really sleep all that great, or you feel just that exhaustion feeling. And that's what...
This person's having a really difficult day.
It's a crummy day, but you can imagine these folks never really get over it. So they feel like that all the time.
Exactly.
And they may weigh it in different degrees. Someone may have more of a headache and someone may have more nausea, but it's all that milieu or that cocktail of feelings that these people who wake up with one day and it just never goes away.
Boy, you just described the first year of my brain injury.
Yeah.
And I even wrote this. It felt as if, although when I first woke up from my second coma, which is where my memories vaguely begin, I was in a total brain fog, and I couldn't remember last night. So I'm assuming retrograde amnesia is not part of this, but that was certainly the case. And that usually happens with a night of heavy binge drinking as well. So I said, it felt similar to times when I woken up from all night drinking benders. And this was a terrible hangover, right? This was the worst I've ever had. And it lasted that way. The memory came back, but absolutely, there's a lot of things that just weren't firing the way they were supposed to, which is basically evidence of a weak brain or an injured brain or a healing brain, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we're realizing is there are a lot of ways that we can measure it and a lot of ways that we can record it and focus on it and try to help that as a marker of improving brain function. We know with concussion, that's kind of the thing everybody points to as how well someone will recover from it or not, is how quickly that cerebral autoregulation, that's kind of our fancy word for it, but how quickly that cerebral autoregulation can recover.
Well,
go ahead, Michelle.
Well, I was just going to say, when it's also recognized, we know that treatment as soon as possible after injury improves outcomes. And I'm going to just loop back to the variables we talked about and female versus male patients, and when women go in and complain, and I have to say I've never experienced binge drinking, so I had nothing to go off of with the feelings and experiences I had after my first brain injury, which was due to a tumor and resection, and then my second brain injury due to a strep infection causing adult onset pandas. And so getting proper care, or even just getting any care, is critical. But when the patient comes in with these list of symptoms and they are misdiagnosed as menopausal, then that hampers the whole process of recovery, because the medical professionals are chasing one tail when there's another trail that is leading in an entirely different direction. So being aware as a practitioner, being aware and open to what the patient is saying is critical, because these symptoms, like you say, they are common to a number of other experiences, and one might be drinking too heavily or hormone dysregulation. And so recognizing that it is actually dysfunction of the brain due to a brain injury is really essential.
Yeah, absolutely. And you recognize the value of those kind of flippant catch-all diagnoses that are given, but they're given almost without much thought. But the weight of that goes way beyond that moment, because now that's how you're identified. And maybe if someone isn't as perseverative, they don't persevere as much in trying to find what's wrong, they may just assume it is these hormones, and then they head down this road of trying to treat the hormone when that isn't even wrong, so it can be such a far-reaching effect by just that one little diagnosis.
Well, and we know that I often refer to the first book on functional neurology I happened to pick up, which is Why Isn't My Brain Working by Dr. Datis Karazian. And he says in there, a brain injury within a few hours will affect digestion. So we know right there that, I mean, maybe not in these terms that it's dysautonomia, but we know that you hit the head, it affects the gut. And now we're starting to learn more, hear more, read more about the gut-brain axis, the brain-gut axis. However, I mean, that's fairly mild. I mean, that you might feel an upset stomach. And Kevin and I are pretty certain you've seen some really serious or severe cases of dysautonomia. Would you be able to share some history with us?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can talk about it in different ways. One thing I think is important is we're getting so much better at identifying, especially the gut types of problems that people have. And that's often a primary complaint for a lot of people. But you can imagine, I mean, you don't think about digesting your food, yet it happens.
Right.
And there are immune responses that are associated with that. Most people can consider Europe in the God's country up there. So that when it gets cold out, and if you look at your arms and your shins and maybe even around your face, your skin kind of gets dry, right?
Yes.
And you have a little extra lotion in the cold.
How did you know?
So why does that happen?
Tell me, please.
Well, I mean, if you think about, if I want to stay warm, I've got to send my blood to my trunk, to the core of me, and keep it warm, keep all the vital areas warm.
Yes.
Which means I'm going to send less blood out to the periphery.
Mm-hmm.
And when I send less blood, or if I create an ischemia, to say it in a fancy way, then I'm going to have, my tissue's not going to be as strong, right? I might have a little flaking. I might get a little thinner skin. I might have some cracking even.
Yes.
Now, most of you can, if you trace your cheek down toward your mouth, you realize that there's not a very good delineation between your skin on the outside and your oral cavity that goes in, and that oral cavity becomes your esophagus, and then your stomach, and then your small intestine. So it's this really, it's almost the same kind of tissue. And your gut lining is there. It's got that nice mucosal membrane to protect it and allow you to have good transfer of food that breaks down, goes across that membrane, and then fuels you.
Yes,
but if you create ischemia in the gut, or if you have these immune problems or the dysautonomia problems that can come with head injury or with other things, then you're going to create ischemia primarily in the areas that you need it the least. So if you think about blood flow, you don't always need blood flow in your gut, right? So if you have this autonomic system that is kind of in charge of you running from a bear the same way it is resting and digesting. So if you're in a scenario where your brain always thinks you're running from a bear and your heart rate's high and your respiration is a little off and your blood pressure's high, then that all takes energy to run that. And the first place it's going to take energy from is the last place that really needs it. So food can kind of sit in your gut for a little while.
Okay.
So it'll steal it. Anytime you have to steal energy, whether it's for a tight muscle or for a fast heartbeat, you're going to steal it mostly from your gut. So if I steal the blood from there, there's a probability I'm going to create that kind of dry skin inside my gut. And this is where we talk about leaky gut and things like that.
Yeah. I like that you brought up blood flow being where, in the dry skin and whatnot. I just wanted to highlight that blood is what's transporting all of your nutrients to every place in your body. So if you have reduced blood flow, you have reduced nutrients going to that area, which means that it's not functioning as well. And additionally, it also gives energy. Blood provides substrate, which is a fancy way of saying fuel for energy, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So if we reduce that, then we're getting less nutrients and usually more toxins built up, because it actually takes energy to mitigate free radicals or toxins in the body.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and so then that when Dr. Keiser talks about ischemia or the inadequate blood supply to the gut and that leaky gut syndrome, carry on from that point, please, Dr. Keiser. That's important. Yeah.
I think it is. I think it is, because we're getting better at testing these things, and if we understand it throughout the whole story, I think we get better at treating it. And so if you think about it, ischemia is really a lack of the number one substrate that Kevin was talking about is super important, is oxygen.
Yes.
And we know that our brain and our nervous system, without oxygen, we just don't do very well. I mean, how long can you hold your breath in a pool before brain damage becomes evident, right? So you don't have super long. And if you take blood supply away, you take oxygen away, especially with brain and nervous tissue, even autonomic tissue.
Or before your autonomic system is like, inhale right now.
Yeah.
You can't hold your breath for that long. Yeah.
Sure. So if we start to take oxygen away, the tissues and things that support it don't function very well. And that's our first step. So looking at leaky guts and not being able to transmit effectively, if you have tissues or if you have food substrate that's not able to break down very well.
Right.
If it doesn't break down all the way, but you've got bigger gap junctions, bigger holes in your gut lining, then they'll still make their way into the blood. And if you've got an immune response that's appropriate or even hyperactive, like we see in a lot of dysautonomia cases, then you're going to be hyperactive to those things getting into your blood system, which is kind of a good thing in some ways because you want it to be that way. But it can mean that we can start to be sensitive or have immune reactions to our food. So in the short term, taking away food can be good because it takes you out of that acute scenario.
Sure.
But as a chronic treatment, we really like to do things that allow you to heal that gut barrier so that you don't continue to evolve down that sensitivity loop, which is what we're seeing. And those of you that have been on those diets know that. You start off with, you take wheat and dairy away and you feel fantastic. And then that kind of goes away a little bit. And then so you're like, well, I need to do wheat, dairy, soy, eggs, the whole thing. And then you piece by piece, you start taking a piece out and you feel a little better. And then it kind of, don't feel as good again. And you take another piece out and it's not as good again.
Right.
So, I mean, that's one way to do it. But I think if we can help repair the tissue and stop the process from occurring, to me, clinically, that seems like a more viable approach for a long-term case.
Well, and then how many patients who may have even a mild brain injury and even perhaps more, some dysfunction, some dysautonomia, develop these allergies and then are sent to an allergy specialist for testing. And it's like a red herring. Nobody's recognizing the fact that it was actually related to a breakdown in the gut, which started with the brain injury. So that going upstream, that root cause model is overlooked, and we're just doing symptomatic treatment, assessment and treatment on now what's presenting as an allergy. Exactly.
And then how much, if you've gone through this, the autonomic system is designed as a stress modulating system. It'll turn your ability to deal with stress up or down. If you're just relaxing under a tree, you don't need a whole lot of autonomic activity. You shift it to a parasympathetic mode. You're just relaxing. You're recovering. You're rebuilding. And then as you take demands of life, that shifts you away from that. So that dysautonomia is the inability to be able to compensate those things appropriately. So people that have dysautonomias don't respond as well to stress because they're already experiencing life as though it's very stressful, even though it may not be.
Right,
So,
sure.
So that poses a problem for people if now making dietary modifications or lifestyle modifications is kind of a stressful thing for people. So if it adds more stress than you're able to take away from the food, then it's almost a worse scenario for that person.
Well, and then we get into the fact that when we start taking foods out of our diet, then we have an effect on the microbiome and its diversity. And then we know that whole gut-brain connection becomes affected because we go back into our building blocks and nourishment and not having a full substrate to run the machine, to run the body.
Your garden and your gut changes very drastically, and that causes different neurotransmitter activation. And they've been able to point to that in research showing different microbiota that are more prevalent in Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's, and so you can see that it's having an effect. So I think it's amazing, and I think we're learning a ton. If I can give a little plug, the American Gut Project. By Dr. Knight is just amazing, and $100 and you get your microbiome tested, and they're able to do a lot with that. I don't get anything from them. I don't have any disclosure. I just think what they're doing is really cool.
It is, and there are so many of these projects interested in the diversity within our gut garden, and
I actually want to bring up Ubiome.
Yes.
I believe they have a free tests, or at least they did at one point.
Well, in the springtime they were doing some.
Oh, nice.
But people are testing the microbiomes of the pets living with them, their domestic animals, and realizing that we all form a community within our household, and then that little community is part of this bigger community, and we are all connected. I have this vision in my mind, this image in my mind, of all the dogs running at the off-leash park, getting to know one another, kiss, 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 lick, 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 and bringing that home, and same thing with their people. We're out hugging and kissing and handshaking, and so there's just this constant exchange of microbes, and it's really all fascinating when you start to take a look at what you'd said, our gut garden and its metabolic processes and the neurotransmitters that are created. It really gets deep and fascinating very quickly.
Yeah, I experienced this on a personal level that made me kind of really hone into it when I had some problems with my heart and had some symptoms that would be in the heart of dysautonomia, and I experienced them myself, which was an interesting kind of ironic place to be.
Would you share that with us?
Yeah, so I was having some problems with my heart being able to have normal ejection fractions, and so I wasn't getting enough blood to my head, and as a consequence, I experienced all those symptoms, and pretty severely, to the point where I couldn't. It wasn't even like I was trying to eliminate food. It's like I couldn't eat food. I couldn't tolerate anything.
Good heavens.
And then, so you look at blood work. A lot of people, when that happens, they look at the blood work and they analyze it and all this. And what you see with all these people is the same thing I saw in myself. Was it just looks like scattershot. It's just everywhere.
Oh no.
Your kidneys are a little funky, but it's not like a pattern, and your liver and everything. So everything's a little off.
Okay.
And I couldn't eat anything. There was a point where I was down to like lentil soup because it was the only thing I could digest. And then I went in and I had a surgery, and within a couple weeks, could eat everything again and be completely normal. I was getting to where I would eat, and I had these hives and all sorts of crazy stuff that would happen. But within just a couple weeks of allowing that system to reset, everything was back to normal.
And which system did you do the reset on?
So my whole autonomic system. So everything in my gut, so my liver and my kidneys and my ability to move my gut, to be able to digest food and have peristalsis and the whole thing.
So then let me get personal, if I may. Where was the surgery?
So I had a cardiac ablation, so I had a heart surgery.
Okay.
And normalized my heart rhythm, and was able to have a normal blood supply again. my heart wasn't screaming away, and the whole thing kind of cooled down, and I felt better and better and better. And I was lucky enough to be able to apply some of the things I know about neuro rehab to cardiac rehab, and and that's been a good experience for me, and it's changed a lot of what I do.
Of course,
from a practice perspective with patients, it was a terrible experience, but a good one because it put it right in front of me, and changed the way I do a lot of rehab, especially for people that are more active. So concussions and things where we want to get them exercising again has completely changed my paradigm with that. And we do a lot of things very, very different than we did before. And then, obviously we're doing things different than everybody else even before. So,
of course.
Well, again, thinking about the paradigm, and I'm assuming you were in functional neurology and in this chiropractic space before you had this happen.
I was already giving lectures on dysautonomia when I had this happen. So
perfect. Okay.
So it was already
perfect.
I was kind of already in that specialty, and then witnessing it in myself, going, "Oh no!"
Right. So the point I want to make is that most people, if they're having trouble digesting something, where do they go? A gastroenterologist.
Yes.
Right. But what it came down to in this case was your brain and your heart.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it's super interesting, again, when we're talking about the systems in the body, how changing any system in the body can change every system in the body.
That's exactly right. So you wouldn't think about your heart
so
affecting
important.
Your digestion very much.
Right.
Yes, precisely. But you can draw a line straight from the heart to the gut. You
can. That was my experience, and it only served to kind of strengthen the resolve of the things we're finding, and kind of know this is where we want to go.
Really cool.
As my then 8-year-old child said to me, "Well, I don't see what the problem is. It's all connected." And he couldn't figure out why I had to go to so many different doctors. He just shook his head and thought there should be one because it's all connected. And I mean, there's an 8-year-old, 2 years ago, he couldn't figure out why it had to be chopped up into little tiny bits.
Right.
Well, I don't see what's so hard about this, right?
Yes, I know.
It's a big deal here.
I'm expecting great things. He comes up with, like everybody's child, right? I mean, they all have great ideas, but some of his conclusions really just they drop little bombs. I mean, I just really wake up, and that was one of them. And it's so true, and it's the way that I've started to look through functional nutrition, that I've started to look at our world and where our food comes from, and how that soil actually affects, from the garden outside, affects my garden inside, my internal terroir. So yes, it's a beautiful learning experience. So thank you for sharing that very personal story with us, Dr. Keiser. And Kevin has another question for you.
Yeah, I wanna circle it back to brain injury. So with brain injury, how do we usually see it treated versus how we see, say, a broken arm or something else that is injured and needs to be rehabilitated?
So if you talk about things in terms of, like, you break your arm, you go in, you have the imaging done, you look at the arm, it certainly is broken, right? No question. And they do things and they reset it, but then you got to let it heal. And we let it heal, and then we do things to help rehab it, to get the strength back, to understand how to use it again, to make our bones stronger so that they can absorb the load. And that's pretty commonplace. We recognize that. An NFL athlete, I'm very lucky to have worked in where I have. But you get superstars, people that come in with brain injuries, and they're like, I would have much rather just broken my leg because I know how that whole process goes.
Oh, yes.
So with brain injuries, though, we may image them, and the imaging isn't really designed unless you've got a bleed or something growing. You can't really see anything.
Right.
And
or unless
we just
kind
of
of
look at it and say, well,
definition.
I don't know. Yeah, and you guys have
fiber
you know all about
tracking,
that.
Crazy cool stuff with
super cool, but
DTI
not practical for the average kid that's had a football or a hockey injury or something,
Yeah.
bell rung, totally.
And a lot
Yeah.
of that, the DTIs and things, you need a pre-MRI to be able to compare it against and be able to run
Right.
and your Tesla
Right.
magnet has to be a big enough magnet to be able to run the software and all that
Sure.
stuff. But
Plus, it's still, the HDFT that I was doing, it's still in research right now.
exactly.
But
So
yeah,
not
it's
everybody-
really cool stuff.
But it's super cool, and I hope that's where we're going. And,
I hope so.
But when you think about that, we know how to do an arm injury. We know how to fix the brake. When it comes to our brain, we just we image it. We may, do some things, and the primary treatment is to just kind of go home and hope, I guess. Hope it gets better.
Yes.
We say rest and those things, but it's really hope because that rest isn't proving it. And a lot of people get better. But better is also subjective because it doesn't mean that the system works again. It may be functional, but it may not be best. But so I think there are too many times where we accept that, or we don't know that that's what we should accept or not. And rather than seeking out a solution and fixing the problem, we just kind of hope that it might get better. And so that's what I am kind of on a little crusade to try to help with and try to just help people know that there are options. And I think the more people that know their options, the more people get help, the more people want to learn about it. And that gives steam to be able to make it more commonplace. And like we said earlier, it kind of fast forwards our journey through medical advancements.
So what are our options? What are options for our listeners who are on this journey? They're hearing about, we love functional neurology on this podcast.
I know you guys have had some great guests. I got to look through your lineup.
Yeah, and it's just, we really, it changed our lives so dramatically that we want other people to know about it, and hopefully they can pursue it. And you already mentioned to have to have simply the strength to persevere through the conventional medical system, allopathic medical, drug-based system, and to get into a patient-based functional medicine system. It takes a lot of time, energy, research, and resources. Not everything is covered by insurance because it's so new and out of the box. So what are these options that you're talking about? What can our listeners take home today, right now?
Sure. So I think if you find yourself in that boat where what we talk about makes a little sense and you think it might help you, that's a pretty good place to start from.
Yes.
And you can seek out some of these people. There are people that are trained that I was fortunate enough to train with all over the world. The people that have the fellow that we had talked about, I don't know if you have any in your podcast notes or anything, but the Traumatic Brain Injury Fellowship. Those people are well trained, and it's a network of people that are very humble people and always communicating and trying to get better. So, finding someone that's near you is a really great start. Someone to talk to, and they may be able to push you in the right direction. Most of them are super highly trained and can do some amazing things.
And so
Super
what's that
quick.
link?
What are those letters after
So
the
it's-
name or?
Yeah, so it's FABBIR.
Yes.
And
it's a
.com?
very
No.
So interesting. That's the letters you could probably put in a Google search. Right now, that board
fellow
is one
of
that's
the Academy of Brain
Injury Rehabilitation.
Rehabilitation. Gotcha.
Yeah, nice.
FIBIR.
FABBIR. Yep.
B.
And,
so two B's. What's the second B?
Because I think the first one is board, and the second one is
board.
brain.
That's what it is. Cool.
Yeah. So what we'll find is there's some pretty exciting things coming out with the ACNB and the ACFN are really kind of spearheading what we're seeing with chiropractic credentialing and making sure that there is just a great system in place for when people receive credentials, that it is certified and ratified and of the highest standing.
And what are those two organizations?
Those are two organizations that the ACFN is the group that is the governing body for all chiropractic neurologists, the DACMB, and the ACFN is for all the fellows in chiropractic in functional neurology. And they're very similar in a lot of ways. The main difference is that if you're not a chiropractor, it's hard to get the approval as a chiropractic neurologist. So there's an opportunity to have a fellowship in functional neurology. So that's kind of where that lives. But those two groups are working really strongly to be able to kind of set the standard through the FABBIR on the brain injury rehab to be able to kind of set the standard for what that accreditation will be. So there is no website currently for it, but you can find those practitioners searching online. But that's simply because that group is spending some extra time to make sure that everything is at the highest standard, even though those people have been boarded and certainly worked very hard. They're a little harder to find at the moment because all those processes are going through, and it'll be a really, really cool thing when it's done. And it'll be great just for all specialty sciences within the profession. So it's pretty cool stuff, but that kind of explains why they're harder to locate what it is and who they are and what they do.
Right. Beautiful. Well, and it's so new, and these organizations are young, and they're just emerging. So we've got organizations just setting up their websites and putting together their list of members, and that all takes time. Kevin and I were on a bent earlier in the spring. We were going to collect all the names of, and I mean, it's overwhelming to put this together. So I understand.
It's a super positive thing, and it does take time and takes a little bit of elbow grease, but I think it's helping, and you're seeing an amazing thing where you've got these physicians from all over the world that are being just trained at a fast pace to be able to step up and serve people in this arena.
So I'm just looking online here, and so the FABBIR designation is the trademark of the American College of Functional Neurology.
Yes.
Is that okay?
Yes,
good.
The ACFN. Yep. Sorry, I'm using abbreviations because they're easier on my word muscles.
Well, and you speak them so often that we understand. Yes, we understand. Sometimes Kevin and I, even in our conversations, we say, okay, back that up. Let's just explain that in case we've got a first-time listener, because we want to be able to, pick up and carry on and do their own research, be independent, but informed as best we can. So
that's right. Patient empowerment, baby.
Yeah,
that's right. I love it.
Thank you so much for this information and for the links to, we'll put those on the podcast page so that other listeners can continue their search. But this understanding the dysautonomia and some of the roadblocks that are in the way, just as far as misdiagnosis goes. So when we think back to the fact that, as you said, the heart, the gut, the skin, all of this can lead back to that root cause of even a mild brain injury, a little bonk on the head. And so I think more patients need to be aware of it so they can help make their physician more aware of the fact that, oh, by the way, I did hit my head when I was climbing out from underneath the stairs, putting away seasonal decorations. And I had a girlfriend who did exactly that. And she was all woozy and she couldn't figure out why. I said, Dawn, you've given yourself a concussion. You must take care. And she didn't think twice about it. But it became quite serious, and she really had to focus back on the fact that she had a brain injury just from climbing out underneath the staircase.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many signs that present themselves, not to say too much, but you think of migraine. Migraine is a vasospasm, and it's
there you go.
That's exactly that. So how many people suffer with migraines that don't think about it under those terms? And TIA strokes, people that have strokes from vasospasms. It's a huge segment of our population, and it has a huge burden on people as we age. I mean, people are starting to have them earlier and earlier, and these are all forms of that dysautonomia, or that change in the vascularity. And if we could do something, imagine if we could just cut down a portion of the people that have strokes. I mean, it would be incredible for what we could do for our humans on the planet. So just things to think about and understand that there's a huge population of people.
We could talk about all that.
I was just going to say,
You open up a whole Pandora's box. I want to like shit into migraines and dysautonomia and how we can address these things and prevent migraines and whatnot. But I think we got to wrap up, and I want to thank you so much for everything you do, for everything you teach, and for everything you've shared with us on this.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, I had such a good time. You guys are fun, entertaining hosts, so you make it easy, and I got a smile on my face the whole time. So I'm super happy to join you, and I'm so proud of your mission. And your patient education and awareness is such an integral thing, and it takes such champions to be able to spend their time to be able to reach out to them, because you know how it feels to be in that dark place where you don't know where to go, and to have a hand reach out and pull you up is a really amazing thing. So thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you for those kind words. And you will give a call when you're in Canada next, won't you?
Of course.
Western Canada, that is. If you're in Ontario, you talk to Carrick's family. But if you're out in the mountains out west here, you please, I'd just love to pick you up, and we'll find a lovely restaurant or something to.
Absolutely. Well, call it a day. It sounds fantastic. We'll always bring our kiddos up with us, and we have a great time with them. So
wonderful. Well, I will look forward to the call.
Awesome. Very good.
Thank you again, Dr. Keiser. We wish you a wonderful day on a beautiful sunny autumn walk in Michigan.
Thank you very, very much. We'll talk to you both very soon.
Cheers. Thank you so much. Bye. Well, that's it for this episode, guys. Thanks so much for being here. If you enjoyed it, head over to iTunes and leave us a review. It helps us to reach more people and to affect people's lives, really. Yes, definitely. And whilst you're on the line, if you would kindly jump on over to patreon.com/AIBI and drop $1 in the bucket, maybe $2. That would help us with our production costs. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. I just want to say that Dr. Nate Keiser really opened my mind to a lot of really interesting things. He's such a gentle soul. I can't imagine what he would be like. Well, I can imagine what he would be like. He would be that place where a patient could simply come to rest because he gets it. And having been a patient himself and sharing that story with us, it really grounds practitioners, as we're finding. There's a lot of humility in being on the other side of the desk. I actually spoke with a client today who at one point worked with Dr. Keiser, and he's a very gentle soul. What he told her at one point, and I think she's okay with me sharing this little anecdotal story. Yes. Is that one time she was crying, and Dr. Keiser said, "Oh, don't worry, your eyes are just, they've been working out so much, they're sweating right now." It's so true, isn't it, when we think of how much input those eyes provide to the brain? There's got to be a response from somewhere. That's, who would have thunk to say that, hey? I love some of, in his comments, his quotable quotes from our conversation today, a change in any system in the body can change every system in the body. And that's such good news for those of us who have been struggling to get attention from a medical practitioner who is looking at one system. And once we branch neurology out to incorporate the entire body, then we're starting to get some traction. I also like Dr. Keiser's
comment about most chronic illnesses associated with the brain can be prevented or cured. I mean, how uplifting is that? So we can start today. We can start today to reverse that neurodegeneration and find that cure, and of course in everyone else around to prevent neurodegeneration. So I'm excited for people to hear this episode.
Yeah. On the video on my About page, I say exactly that. I say we don't need to be sick in order to get better.
Oh, it's so true. Well said. Very,
That's
for a 20-something-year-old, you've got lots of wisdom.
You think I'm younger than I am.
Yeah, I know. I like poking fun at you.
I know.
But honestly, let's get back to being serious here. This dysautonomia, it actually is a missing piece in my puzzle because it has never come up. But when I think of difficulty regulating, the various systems in my body, my heart rate, my blood pressure, I had issues with digestion and dilation, kidney function.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I had UTIs because of this, the pandas, that strep infection that affected my brain. Oh my gosh, my body temperature control, all of this, it really, when you start looking at an abnormal heart rate as not the heart, but perhaps the brain, then that changes pretty much everything.
Yeah, there's so much to this.
Mm-hmm. So let's get this episode out to the people.
Good. Let's wrap it up. Thank you guys so much for being here. And till next time, we will see you later.
Bye for now.
Someone take me to a doctor to take away this curse. Someone take me to a doctor.